The Galactic Council chamber was a cathedral of intimidation. Its ceiling stretched into darkness, vanishing into a void that no one could measure, and its walls were carved with the history of species long gone, extinct because they had been too arrogant, too weak, or too slow. Every seat at the circular platform was occupied by beings who had survived conquest by becoming precise, ruthless, or cruel. And in the middle of that weighty, calculated scrutiny stood humanity's ambassador, Elena Marrow. She was smaller than most of them, her suit plain, her expression calm. A subtle observer might have thought her insignificant. But I like to pause here when telling this story because this is the moment the galaxy expected fear, and instead humanity gave silence. Not ignorance. Not arrogance. Silence that carried decades of preparation, experience, and quiet confidence. The Speaker of the Council, a towering figure whose many eyes reflected the history of their species, rose with a grace that was part ceremony and part intimidation. Humanity, the Speaker began, voice resonating across the chamber, your expansion, your colonies beyond your home system, your refusal to submit your fleets for inspection, these actions are unacceptable. Your growth represents a threat to order. Therefore, the Council declares war. It was not a declaration of anger or vengeance. It was bureaucratic, cold, calculated. And that is precisely why it should have terrified humanity. Because the Council never threatened without following through. Elena did not flinch. She did not hesitate. She did not raise her voice. She simply said, in the calm, measured tone that had become her signature, "Understood. We will proceed accordingly." I often stop here when narrating to remind listeners that this calm response was not the courage of the moment. It was the product of preparation. Years, decades even, of anticipating this exact scenario. And it was this calm, this refusal to panic, that would eventually make the Council regret underestimating humans. They thought she was small. They thought she was weak. They thought her species would bend or break. They had no idea. The chamber erupted, not in applause but in disbelief. Some of the elder species tilted their heads in confusion. Others whispered among themselves, trying to understand how a species so young could respond with composure to a war declaration. Elena turned and walked toward the exit, each step measured, deliberate, unhurried. Her mind was already calculating. Not retaliation, not yet, but preparation for what was to come. And here I pause again because this is the first lesson that the galaxy would learn. Humans rarely announce their strength. They prepare. Quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. And that habit, unassuming, almost invisible, was humanity's first weapon. Before we move on, it's important to understand what the Council thought of humans. They had observed them for decades, yes, but only superficially. They had seen small exploratory vessels slip past sensor arrays, colonies expand without interference, and communication networks that seemed chaotic. Aliens prized order, predictability, hierarchy. Humans seemed messy, inefficient, and emotional. That was exactly the advantage humans were counting on. Humans always used what the galaxy underestimated against them: patience, creativity, and improvisation. These were not easily measured, and the Council failed to see their value, until it was far too late. As Elena left the chamber, the alien delegations began to discuss strategy in low, resonant tones. Many dismissed humanity as a fleeting species, one that would crumble when confronted with the real weight of the galaxy. One even joked, though quietly, that the humans would be gone within 5 cycles. And here is a point I always emphasize: arrogance is often a bigger weakness than any weapon. The Council believed it held the upper hand because they assumed humans were predictable, because they assumed humans would react with fear. But humans rarely react in the ways others expect. They adapt. They endure. They survive. And that adaptability, unnoticed in these early moments, would define the coming conflict. Meanwhile, back on Earth, no alarms rang. No emergency broadcasts. Life went on. Humanity's fleet was not yet fully deployed, and colonies in the outer systems were still operating normally. Yet behind this appearance of calm, the machinery of preparation hummed quietly. Admiral Jonah Reyes walked the bridge of a shipyard orbiting Mars, observing the construction of modular vessels. Each hull was small individually, but capable of rapid assembly, reconfiguration, and repair. Civilian cargo ships were being secretly retrofitted to act as surveillance platforms or fast attack craft. Engineers in orbital stations ran simulations endlessly, not for entertainment, not for glory, but for survival. And here, I remind the listener, is one of humanity's defining traits. Humans expect failure and plan for it. They build redundancy into everything. They accept mistakes as inevitable, and in that acceptance they find opportunity. Elena's calmness was not without reason. She had studied every known alien tactic, every documented war, every recorded negotiation that had ended in disaster. She knew that the Council did not understand humans because it could not. They had never seen a species whose defense was not driven purely by fear or pride. Humans had a different equation: courage, intelligence, teamwork, creativity, and above all, patience. She had spent months preparing for this moment, rehearsing words, analyzing gestures, predicting reactions. But she had also spent years preparing for this war in ways the Council would never see: the construction of fleets, the training of crews, the evacuation protocols for colonies. Preparation, as she knew, would speak louder than words. The initial announcement rippled across human systems. News networks broadcasted carefully edited statements, civilian administrators implemented emergency plans, and fleets moved into pre-assigned positions. There was no panic. There was no spectacle. Just quiet, methodical execution. The Council expected chaos. Humanity delivered control. And here is the subtle truth: sometimes the most powerful display is restraint. When others expect rage or surrender, calm can be terrifying. Humans understood this instinctively, perhaps because on Earth, they had learned the hard way that panic rarely solved anything. Back in the Council chamber, discussion turned to immediate strategy. The species represented there debated where to strike first, which colonies to neutralize and which fleets to deploy. They assumed that humans would respond as every other young species had, with desperation, with fear, with overextension. But humans had learned long ago that the universe did not bend to intimidation. Humans had faced environmental collapse, pandemics, economic crises, and internal conflict on their own planet. They had survived them all. And now, confronted with a galactic declaration of war, they approached it as a complex problem to be solved, not a spectacle to be dramatized. Elena's departure from the chamber was observed closely by a few more perceptive Council members. They noticed a subtle detail: her pace was measured but not hurried. Her posture was upright but not rigid. Her eyes, calm and steady, scanned the chamber one last time before she exited. That small moment of observation would haunt those who underestimated her. In human behavior there is often a signal in composure. It is not arrogance. It is confidence. And for the Council, reading it wrong was their first mistake. On Earth, the broader public had mixed reactions. Some felt fear, yes. Others felt disbelief. But most were unaware of the depth of preparation that had been quietly underway for decades. Admiral Reyes, Elena, Captain Mira Chin, and a network of leaders across human space understood that this declaration was not an immediate threat, but a confirmation of something long suspected: that humanity's place in the galaxy would not be unchallenged. And yet there was no despair. Just focus. Just resolve. And in that focus lay humanity's first true advantage. The galaxy expected an emotional reaction. Humans gave reasoned action. And reasoned action, as the centuries would show, is far more dangerous than rage. That night, as Elena prepared her report for the Earth Council, she reflected on the nature of fear and strength. She thought of the young human crew training on Mars, of engineers retrofitting vessels in silent orbital bays, of scientists monitoring alien signals for patterns no one else would notice. And she thought of herself, standing alone in a chamber of beings that considered her species insignificant, and yet feeling the weight of responsibility that only humans could bear. That combination of calm and accountability, humility and courage, was uniquely human. And it was the foundation on which the next decade of interstellar conflict would be built. The day ended quietly. The Council had spoken. Humanity had listened. And in that quiet, deliberate silence, the first move had already been made. Humanity would not react in ways expected. Humanity would endure. Humanity would adapt. And when the first shots were fired, when the first colonies were threatened, the Council would discover, to its profound surprise, that humans had been preparing not just to survive, but to prevail. Long before the Galactic Council ever even noticed Earth, humanity had learned one of the universe's oldest lessons: the cosmos does not care about good intentions. Humanity had sent exploratory probes across the solar system and beyond, listening for signals, mapping distant systems, and hoping to make contact. Most probes never returned. Some came back damaged or scrambled, carrying data that no one wanted to believe. And yet, humans did not panic. They did not despair. Instead, they adjusted. They learned. They prepared. That was their nature. That is a point worth pausing on. Humans survived not because the universe was kind, but because humans refused to depend on kindness. Admiral Jonah Reyes often thought about this when walking through the orbital shipyards of Mars. The vessels being constructed there looked ordinary at first glance, nothing compared to the massive warships of older civilizations. But each hull, each module, had been designed with adaptability in mind. Every cargo ship could be converted into a reconnaissance vessel. Every mining drone could double as a tactical sensor. Every automated repair station could serve as a forward command post. This was not showmanship. It was foresight. Humans did not build superweapons for shock value. They built systems that could endure, adapt, and multiply. And that was exactly what made them dangerous to the Council, a species that relied on brute force and predictable strategies. Elena Marrow had been chosen as humanity's ambassador for a reason. Not because she was extraordinary in the usual sense, but because she had spent her life understanding others. She understood psychology, negotiation, diplomacy, and the subtle interplay between perception and reality. She had trained for decades to face species whose lifespans, thought processes, and motives were completely alien. And when war became inevitable, Elena did not intend to rely solely on force. She relied on preparation, knowledge, strategy. She carried the weight of every ship, every colony, every human who might be called upon to defend themselves. That level of responsibility can break a person, but it also shapes them into something the galaxy cannot underestimate. In the training complexes scattered across Earth and the colonies, human crews practiced endlessly. Not just combat drills but scenario drills. How to evacuate civilians under fire, how to reroute resources, how to repair ships while under attack, how to navigate a fleet without clear communication if satellites were destroyed. These drills were tedious. They were exhausting. They were often invisible. And that is the lesson the Council would later learn. Humans did not prepare for glory. They prepared for survival. They prepared for the unthinkable. And when the unthinkable arrived, their preparation was already decades old. Meanwhile, civilian systems quietly became part of the defense network. Cargo freighters carried emergency supplies to outlying colonies, often without anyone noticing. Farmers on distant worlds adapted crop schedules to account for potential sieges or blockades. Scientists kept watch on alien signals, detecting patterns and inconsistencies that even the most sophisticated alien civilizations overlooked. Humans were building war machines, but they disguised them as industry, agriculture, or commerce. Their brilliance was subtle, almost invisible. And that subtlety would be the first shock to the Council once conflict began. Admiral Reyes often held private meetings with engineers and strategists, not to give orders but to listen. Humans had a habit of discovering opportunities through collaboration. No one person held the full picture. Each crew member, each engineer, each analyst contributed something vital. Humans trusted each other enough to share ideas freely, yet disciplined enough to follow complex protocols without hesitation. This balance of trust and discipline, I often remind listeners, is one of the most powerful tools humanity wields. It is not arrogance. It is practicality, and when used correctly, practicality can topple empires. Elena's preparations went beyond fleets and logistics. She studied the very nature of alien thought. She learned how species made decisions, how they valued life, how they interpreted threats. The Council, she noted in her reports, assumed that fear would be the strongest motivator for humans. They were wrong. Humans do not always act out of fear. Often they act out of responsibility. They act out of ingenuity. They act out of hope. And that hope, when paired with preparation, becomes a weapon no alien can measure until it is already too late. On the colonies, people lived their daily lives while unknowingly contributing to the war effort. Children practiced emergency drills in schools. Scientists monitored alien activity under the guise of academic research. Engineers performed minor modifications to infrastructure, all in preparation for potential attacks. Even artists, in their quiet work, often documented historical events with subtle warnings, creating a cultural memory of resilience and awareness. This collective mindset, where every human had a role in survival, was as important as any fleet or weapon. The Council could never have predicted that an entire species could fight as a single organism, not through coercion but through shared responsibility. Humans were also learning from their mistakes. Conflicts on Earth, interstellar accidents, and early colony failures provided lessons in humility, strategy, and improvisation. Humans assumed that systems would fail. They assumed that plans would be interrupted. They assumed that the universe would not accommodate their desires. And yet, in this expectation of failure, humans found an advantage. They learned how to pivot, adapt, and exploit opportunities that others missed. The Council would not understand this until they faced the full weight of human flexibility in real combat situations. Elena often reflected privately on the irony of it all. Humans, seen by older civilizations as primitive, were quietly constructing one of the most sophisticated defensive networks the galaxy had ever known. They were small and dispersed, yet interconnected. Weak individually, yet lethal collectively. And through it all they remained calm. That calmness was not the absence of fear. It was the mastery of it. Humans did not seek war. They sought survival. And as history would later show, survival often requires courage, ingenuity, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. Meanwhile, in secret, human scientists worked on communication protocols that could intercept and understand alien signals. Decoding was painstaking, but the payoff was immense. Humans learned not only about alien strategy but also about their weaknesses, their assumptions, and their blind spots. Knowledge was a weapon, I always remind listeners, perhaps the most powerful of all. A fleet of warships is impressive, but a fleet that can anticipate the enemy before they even act is terrifying. By the time Elena prepared to travel to the Council for the first official diplomatic mission, humanity had already established a quiet network of readiness. Every colony, every fleet, every citizen contributed to a system that functioned silently, invisibly, but with lethal efficiency. When she stood before the Council years later, declaring humanity's understanding of their war declaration, it was not bravado. It was reality. Humanity had prepared while others debated. Humanity had planned while others threatened. And humanity had survived while others assumed they would fail. Even the Council's observation satellites, advanced as they were, could not see the depth of human preparation. They noted fleet sizes, industrial output, and colony growth, but they could not measure ingenuity, patience, or collective intelligence. That invisibility was the first lesson that would echo throughout the coming conflict. Humans are rarely what they appear to be. They adapt. They endure. They learn. And when the moment comes, they act, not rashly but decisively. And so, as Elena boarded the small human vessel that would carry her to the Council chamber, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought of the engineers tirelessly modifying hulls, of the crews drilling in zero-gravity bays, of the scientists monitoring signals with meticulous care. She thought of the millions of humans who had contributed in ways no alien would ever recognize. And she smiled quietly. Not because she expected victory but because humanity was ready, prepared, focused. And that, she knew, was the first step toward survival, and eventually triumph. That is the subtle brilliance of humanity. It is not the biggest weapon, the most advanced technology, or the loudest roar that defines them. It is preparation, adaptability, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have done everything possible to survive and to protect those you love. The Council may have underestimated them. The galaxy may have overlooked them. But humans had built a foundation that would hold, even when the universe attempted to tear it apart. The silence of space was broken one day by the sudden arrival of the Council's fleet. Not a fleet that sought diplomacy or negotiation, but a fleet that assumed superiority. Thousands of ships, vast and precise, emerged from hyperspace, their formations perfect, their weapons ready, their confidence absolute. From the bridge of the orbital station on Mars, Admiral Jonah Reyes observed them calmly, sipping his coffee as though watching a routine traffic inspection. To anyone else, this would have been terrifying. To humans, it was a test, a problem to be solved, and humans had always been problem solvers. The Council fleet immediately broadcast its demands: surrender, disarm, and submit your colonies for inspection. The tone was polite, almost clinical, but the message was clear: resistance would be met with overwhelming force. On Earth, news networks relayed the broadcast with urgency, civilians stopped in the streets, and colonies on the edge of human-controlled space braced for invasion. But Admiral Reyes knew something the Council did not. Humans do not panic. They adapt. They survive. And the first move in a war is often not the loudest but the smartest. Captain Mira Chen, commanding the first human defensive flotilla, received her orders and made a decision that would confuse and terrify the alien tacticians. She ordered a retreat. Not because her fleet was outmatched but because retreat could be weaponized. By drawing the Council forces deeper into human-controlled systems, she forced them to extend their supply lines, stretch their sensors, and operate in unfamiliar territory. On Earth, analysts monitored her actions in real time, calculating every possible outcome. And all of them agreed, humans were not acting out of fear. They were acting out of strategy. While the Council assumed panic, civilians in distant colonies were quietly following pre-planned evacuation and defense protocols. Cargo ships that had carried grain and fuel were now moving critical supplies to hidden depots. Mining drones converted into automated sensor platforms. Research stations transformed into mobile command centers. Humans were not rushing blindly. They were executing decades of preparation with the calm efficiency of people who had already envisioned every possible catastrophe. The first shots fell in empty space. Lasers sliced through the void, but no ships were lost. Human colonies had already evacuated civilians, leaving only decoy stations and automated defense turrets to absorb the initial assault. The Council assumed their attacks were devastating. They assumed humans were weak. But humans had never underestimated the value of observation, deception, and patience. Every missed shot, every failed attack, was a lesson humans recorded and analyzed. Every failed maneuver, every misread pattern by the Council, became data to be used against them. Captain Mira Chen's fleet engaged in small-scale skirmishes, striking and disappearing before the Council could adjust. One squadron jammed enemy communications, while another deployed small drones to simulate attacks in multiple directions at once. It was a tactic humans called phantom engagement. To the Council it appeared chaotic. To humans, it was precise, deliberate, and deadly in its subtlety. I often pause here in narration to remind listeners, humans rarely fight with overwhelming force. They fight with intelligence, patience, and coordination that others cannot predict. Meanwhile, Admiral Reyes activated a system the Council never noticed during decades of observation, a layered defense network built across multiple colonies. Sensor satellites monitored every vector of attack, communication relays masked fleet movements, and decoy convoys tricked enemy intelligence at every turn. Humans had prepared for more than one scenario. They had prepared for 20. The Council believed humans were reactive. Humans knew they had to be proactive. And in this chess game, foresight was their greatest weapon. Back on Earth, Ambassador Elena Mero was busy coordinating diplomatic channels. While fleets maneuvered and skirmished in orbit and in the outer colonies, she was negotiating with neutral species, ensuring that human space remained uncontested by third-party opportunists. Humans understood that wars were not only fought with weapons but also with alliances, perception, and timing. The Council underestimated this entirely. They believed that once their fleet dominated space, humans would crumble politically. But humans had spent decades building resilience at every level, and resilience cannot be destroyed by a single fleet. The first real battle occurred near the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. A small human convoy carried critical supplies to an outer colony when the Council fleet appeared. Human ships did not charge blindly. Instead, they dispersed, using asteroid fields as cover. Automated drones released holographic decoys, while human pilots executed evasive maneuvers no alien had ever predicted. Council ships fired at the decoys, wasting precious energy, while the real convoy slipped through the gaps, delivering its cargo safely. Observers would later describe this as genius. I describe it as the natural result of decades of preparation, of understanding that creativity under pressure is more valuable than sheer firepower. But the humans did not just survive, they learned. Every engagement, every close call, was an opportunity to refine strategy. Engineers back at orbital stations modified weapons, improved sensors, and recalibrated communication protocols in real time. Crews shared observations across light years in milliseconds. The Council, used to hierarchical command and strict protocol, could not comprehend the speed and adaptability of human networks. That adaptability would become the first turning point in the war, though neither side recognized it yet. Captain Mira Chen herself became a figure the Council would both fear and misunderstand. During a critical encounter, she ordered her fleet to split into smaller units, some of which feigned retreat while others circled to cut off enemy supply lines. The Council assumed this was desperation. Humans call it preparation paying off in motion. It was not luck. It was the culmination of years of training, coordination, and trust in each other. Every move had a purpose. Every sacrifice had a plan. And as the fleet returned safely to the outer colonies, the Council began to wonder, quietly, almost reluctantly, if humans were more capable than they had ever imagined. On the civilian side, the story was equally remarkable. Colonists on the outer planets ran drills, repaired ships under pressure, and transported critical resources without guidance from higher command. Families separated during evacuations found ways to reunite, engineers improvised fixes on ships and stations, and doctors treated injuries under conditions the Council believed would be catastrophic. Humans were proving a subtle but profound truth. Courage is not always loud and heroism is not always public. Sometimes, it is endurance, ingenuity, and selfless action. By the end of the first strike, the Council's fleet had suffered more delays than they expected. Not a single human ship of significant size had been destroyed. Not because humans were invincible, but because they had anticipated, prepared, and adapted in ways the aliens could not predict. I always remind listeners of this point. The Council assumed victory through force. Humans achieved it through thought, preparation, and cohesion. And that difference, the difference between raw strength and intelligent action, would shape every encounter in the years to come. As night fell on Earth, humans reflected quietly. They did not celebrate. They did not boast. They understood that this was only the beginning. The first strike was a warning, a rehearsal, a glimpse of what the galaxy would attempt to throw at them. And humans, as they always did, would learn, adapt, and endure. Admiral Reyes called a meeting of his senior officers, emphasizing the importance of analyzing every Council maneuver, every pattern, every hesitation. The lesson was clear. In human conflict, victory often belongs to the species that studies, adapts, and survives longer. Ambassador Elena, meanwhile, prepared her next report for the Earth Council. She noted that the first encounter had confirmed humanity's assumptions. The Council relied on predictability, hierarchy, and brute force. Humans relied on creativity, observation, and adaptability. Humans fought not for glory but for survival, and in that focus humans were unbeatable. This, I remind listeners, is one of the subtle qualities that defines HFY. Humans do not need to boast about superiority. They prove it through action, through endurance, and through courage under pressure. And so, as Part 3 closes, humanity had survived its first confrontation with an alien civilization that assumed it would fail. The first shots had been fired, but no human had panicked. Every loss had been calculated, every engagement had been a learning experience, and every human, from Admiral Reyes to Captain Mira Chen to engineers on distant colonies, had contributed to a single, coordinated effort. The galaxy assumed it had the upper hand. Humans had already taken the first real step toward showing them otherwise. This first strike would be remembered not for the number of ships destroyed or the fireworks of battle, but for the lesson it carried. Humans were not predictable. Humans were not weak. Humans could endure, adapt, and strike back in ways no one expected. And that, dear listener, is the beginning of the true story of humanity in the galaxy. A story of patience, ingenuity, courage, and unity that would echo far beyond the first confrontation. Months stretched into years, and the initial shock of the Council's attack faded into the steady rhythm of war. Unlike most species in the galaxy, humans did not fight for glory or conquest. They fought for survival, for their families, for the home they refused to abandon. That is a point I like to make when telling this story. The Council thought they understood war. They assumed it was a contest of firepower and intimidation. Humans had a different approach entirely. They understood that endurance, planning, and coordination often outweighed raw strength. And in that understanding, they held the advantage the aliens never anticipated. Captain Mira Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, overseeing a small fleet that had become the nerve center of human defenses in the outer colonies. Every ship was smaller than the Council's vessels, but they were faster, more flexible, and better coordinated. Mira often reminded her crews of something simple but crucial: we don't have to destroy them all. We just have to survive longer than they expect. It may sound modest, but in practice, it required flawless execution, constant vigilance, and trust in one another. And that trust, built over years of training, repeated drills, and shared hardship, was the invisible strength humans wielded against their alien opponents. The war quickly evolved into a contest of patience. The Council fleet had the firepower to destroy human colonies one by one, but their supply lines stretched thin. Their formations, once perfect, became vulnerable to deception. Human ships, small and numerous, exploited every gap. Some acted as decoys, drawing enemy fire, while others struck at weak points and vanished. Drones swarmed like ghosts, jamming sensors, sending false signals, and confusing alien commanders at every turn. And behind these maneuvers was a network of humans on Earth and in distant colonies, analyzing every move in real time, sharing information across vast distances, and adjusting strategies faster than the Council could react. While battles occurred in space, the human homefront was equally remarkable. Civilian populations played critical roles in defense efforts, often without recognition. Engineers repaired damaged ships, sometimes in zero-gravity bays, under the constant threat of attack. Scientists monitored alien communications, decoding strategies and predicting fleet movements. Farmers on distant colonies adjusted crop schedules, ensuring food supply for both military and civilian populations under siege conditions. Every human, whether in combat or in support, contributed to a single coordinated effort. This was not a spectacle of heroism. It was endurance, ingenuity, and discipline at a scale the Council had never witnessed. Even when humans lost ships or stations, these losses were never wasted. Each incident became data. Each casualty became a lesson. Engineers and strategists studied every detail to ensure that the same mistake would never happen twice. Human resilience was not blind courage. It was an iterative process of learning and adaptation. That process, I often explain when narrating, is one of humanity's defining traits. The Council could destroy physical assets, but it could not destroy knowledge, innovation, or the human will to survive. Ambassador Elena Mero continued her work alongside the fleets. She was not on the battlefield, but she fought in her own way. She communicated with neutral species, ensuring they did not exploit the conflict. She transmitted intelligence from captured Council data to human analysts, and she maintained morale among diplomats and civilian leaders. Her calm presence, even as reports of attacks and losses came in, was a mirror of the larger human approach, measured, patient, and strategic. Humanity's fight was not only in space but in diplomacy, psychology, and perception. During one particularly tense engagement, a convoy carrying vital supplies to the outer colonies was ambushed near the Kuiper Belt. Council ships had anticipated human movement, assuming the same predictable patterns they had observed in simulations. But humans had prepared for unpredictability. Captain Chin split her convoy into multiple units, some of which engaged in decoy maneuvers while the others slipped through undetected. Automated drones released holographic ships to create the illusion of greater numbers. Sensors on the convoy broadcast false coordinates. The Council's ambush failed and the convoy delivered its cargo safely. This engagement became an early example of human strategy in action. Precision, deception, and timing, executed without unnecessary risk to human lives. As the war dragged on, the psychological toll on both sides became apparent. The Council's commanders had expected humans to crumble under pressure, to panic when resources ran low, to break when losses mounted. Instead, humans demonstrated something deeply unsettling to them: patience, endurance, the ability to absorb setbacks and turn them into opportunity. Families continued to function under duress. Colonies reorganized themselves after attacks. Engineers improvised repairs in the dead of night. And humans never gave the Council the satisfaction of predictable panic. Every setback became a step toward adaptation. Meanwhile, Admiral Reyes coordinated the larger strategy, integrating fleet movements, planetary defenses, and civilian support networks. He treated war as a complex system, not a battle of brute strength. Every fleet movement was calculated to maximize efficiency, every defensive station positioned to exploit alien blind spots. Humans understood that war was as much about logistics as it was about combat. The Council, confident in their technological superiority, underestimated the sophistication of human coordination, and that miscalculation would cost them dearly over time. The Council also misread human priorities. Many species value honor, aggression, or glory in war. Humans valued survival, adaptation, and protection of their people. This difference was subtle but critical. Humans did not take unnecessary risks for recognition. They did not glorify individual heroics. Every action, every maneuver served a greater purpose. Even when a human crew sacrificed themselves to protect civilians, it was a calculated decision, not a rash one. Courage, in human terms, was responsibility made action. And that principle carried them further than the Council could predict. Over time, humans began to exploit Council weaknesses systematically. By observing patterns in fleet behavior, humans learned when and where to strike. By analyzing supply chains, they found vulnerabilities to exploit. By studying alien communication, they anticipated orders and delayed operations. The war of attrition favored humans not because they were stronger, but because they were more adaptable. Patience, analysis, and creativity became their weapons, and these weapons had no visible mass or energy signature, only results. One of the most remarkable moments during this period came when a small human fleet trapped a significantly larger Council detachment in a gravity well near an asteroid cluster. By carefully predicting the Council's navigation patterns and exploiting inertia and orbital mechanics, humans neutralized the fleet without firing a single shot. The aliens were stunned not just by the loss, but by the fact that humans had achieved victory without relying on overwhelming firepower. That, more than anything, would cause the Council to rethink its assumptions. I always pause here when narrating because it's one of the clearest examples of HFY intelligence over raw strength. Even amid prolonged warfare, humans maintained a remarkable sense of perspective. Colonies celebrated small successes. Crews marked milestones quietly. Leadership emphasized learning from every encounter. They did not romanticize war. They did not create propaganda glorifying conflict. Instead, they treated it as a challenge, as a problem to solve, as an opportunity to protect the future. And this attitude, I explain to listeners, is one of humanity's most underestimated strengths. It keeps them calm under pressure, focused in chaos, and dangerous when the enemy underestimates them. By the end of this phase of the war, the Council began to realize a chilling truth. Humans could not be beaten through intimidation, surprise, or brute force alone. Humans were resilient, adaptive, and collaborative on a scale the galaxy had never measured. And while the aliens had assumed that war would quickly teach them the limits of humanity, it had instead revealed that humans thrived under pressure, learned from setbacks, and grew stronger through adversity. As Part 4 concludes, the war of attrition had firmly established the nature of human strength. Humans were not the fastest, the largest, or the most technologically advanced. But they were clever, persistent, and united. They survived because they thought ahead, coordinated flawlessly, and valued ingenuity as much as courage. And in doing so, they began to shift the balance of the war in ways the Council had never imagined. This period of the conflict, the slow grinding of strategy, adaptation, and endurance, set the stage for the next phase, when humans would begin turning the tables, not merely surviving but actively exploiting weaknesses, reshaping the Council's assumptions about the species they had so casually dismissed. And that, dear listener, is where the true story of human ingenuity begins to shine. The war had been grinding on for years. Human colonies endured, fleets executed flawless retreats and ambushes, and civilians adapted to a life where every day could bring alien attack. Yet, despite all their resilience, the Council still assumed human strength lay solely in their ability to survive and endure. They were wrong. Humans' true advantage was not their ships or weapons. It was their creativity, their ability to think in ways no alien could anticipate. And that advantage was about to shift the balance of the war in ways the Council would never recover from. Captain Mirachin was the first to recognize the opportunity. During a routine patrol near a cluster of asteroid colonies, her squadron detected a repeating pattern in the Council's fleet movements. Not a flaw in the ships themselves, but a flaw in the logic behind their strategy. The Council assumed that humans would act predictably, evacuate along certain routes, prioritize particular colonies, and respond emotionally to pressure. Mira saw otherwise. Humans did not respond predictably. They analyzed, they calculated, they improvised. And with that mindset, she realized they could turn the Council's own assumptions into a weapon. The first step was intelligence. Humans had already been intercepting alien communications for years, slowly decoding their command structures, identifying redundancies, and mapping their hierarchy. It was painstaking work, often tedious and frustrating. But it was the kind of preparation humans excelled at: long-term, methodical, patient. The breakthrough came when analysts identified that the Council fleet's most senior command ships were relying on automated subordinates to execute orders with minimal human, or alien, supervision. In other words, they were predictable. And predictable, in human terms, was exploitable. Admiral Jonah Reyes approved a bold plan. Operation Anchor, it was called, would not focus on direct engagement. Instead, it would trap portions of the Council fleet in gravitational wells near uninhabited systems. By manipulating orbital mechanics and using long-range electromagnetic pulses to disable hyperspace jump drives temporarily, humans could hold alien fleets in place without destroying them. It was subtle, clever, and terrifyingly effective. The Council, expecting humans to attack head-on, would be caught off guard by the quiet, almost invisible strategy. Meanwhile, Ambassador Elena Mero worked behind the scenes to prepare the diplomatic stage. She knew that victory, even partial, would provoke reactions across the galaxy. Neutral species watched closely, waiting to see which side would falter. By quietly sharing intelligence, demonstrating human restraint, and carefully managing communications, Elena ensured that humans would appear calculated, not reckless. That appearance mattered. The galaxy respects those who survive not just through force but through intelligence. The first operation was set into motion near the Orpheus Belt, a dense cluster of asteroids that humans had mapped and prepared for years. Council scouts, expecting an easy interception, stumbled into a carefully constructed web. Human drones created false sensor signatures, projecting phantom fleets and fake supply lines. Real human ships remained hidden, ready to exploit hesitation. The Council hesitated, recalculated, and miscommunicated, because human deception, subtle and invisible, created uncertainty. And in war, uncertainty can be deadly. Captain Chen's squadron executed the maneuver with precision. Some ships engaged in controlled feints, drawing Council vessels away from the real trap. Others jammed communications to prevent coordination. And when the alien fleet reached the anchor point, its hyperspace drives temporarily disabled by electromagnetic pulses, the humans held them in place. No shots had been fired, yet the Council found itself trapped. Fear, frustration, and confusion rippled through the alien ranks. And I always pause here when narrating to remind listeners, humans did not need overwhelming force to gain an advantage. They relied on preparation, creativity, and understanding the opponent's assumptions. Human ingenuity did not stop at trapping fleets. Analysts observed that the Council's command relied heavily on centralized orders. Once communications were disrupted, confusion spread quickly. Human teams intercepted and subtly altered messages, feeding disinformation. Orders were delayed. Coordinated attacks faltered. Alliances within the Council fleet began to show cracks, as mistrust grew between species that had never doubted each other before. Humans were exploiting psychology as much as strategy, turning alien confidence into hesitation and hesitation into vulnerability. Even in civilian sectors, humans contributed in ways that were equally critical. Colonists continued to repair ships, maintain supply chains, and manage logistics under siege. Scientists on remote stations developed minor technological innovations, adjustments that amplified the effects of military operations. Farmers on frontier worlds ensured food production remained steady, preventing famine from weakening morale. Every action was a calculated contribution to the larger strategy. And the Council, observing from a distance, could not see the invisible web of human coordination supporting every tactical move. The turning point came during a coordinated strike near the Aurora Expanse, a region of dense gas clouds that the Council had never mapped in detail. Humans lured a portion of the fleet into the clouds, then used adaptive sensor arrays and stealth drones to manipulate perception. Council ships fired blindly at phantom signals while real human ships delivered precision strikes on critical systems. By the time the Council realized the deception, significant damage had been done. Yet casualties were minimal on the human side, because humans had never relied on brute force. They relied on efficiency, intelligence, and precise application of effort where it mattered most. During this phase, the psychological impact on the Council became evident. Commanders who had assumed human panic or recklessness were forced to re-evaluate their assumptions. Orders that once flowed smoothly now faltered as uncertainty spread. Species that had relied on fear as a weapon found themselves paralyzed by human patience. And this is, I tell listeners, the subtle power of humanity. They are not the strongest by appearance, nor the most advanced by technology. They are the most adaptable, and adaptability often wins where raw power fails. Even heroes of the battle were quiet. Captain Chin did not celebrate victories. Admiral Reyes did not boast. Elena Mero did not flaunt her diplomatic successes. Humans rarely magnify their own accomplishments. Instead, they observe, analyze, and adapt. And in that restraint lies another lesson. Humility, discipline, and foresight can be as powerful as the largest weapon in the galaxy. The Council would learn this the hard way. The human population also demonstrated resilience beyond the battlefield. Families separated during evacuation drills reunited in improvised safe zones. Children practiced survival routines not out of fear, but as preparation for the unpredictable. Communities on colonies repaired critical infrastructure even while under indirect attack. This collective effort of civilians and military personnel blurred the line between combatant and support, creating a unified human response that the Council could not compartmentalize or predict. It was total coordination, invisible to the enemy, but decisive in effect. By the end of the first phase of Operation Anchor, the Council had suffered a profound blow, not in ships destroyed but in confidence. They had assumed humans were predictable, emotional, reactive. Instead, humans had turned predictability against them, exploited assumptions, and disrupted logistics, communication, and morale simultaneously. The aliens realized too late that humans had been preparing for this moment for decades. They had anticipated the first strike, analyzed the weaknesses in enemy behavior, and executed a strategy that combined deception, endurance, and intelligence. And as the human fleets regrouped, Admiral Reyes and Captain Chin took stock of what had been achieved. No species in the galaxy had ever seen anything quite like it. Humans had not won through overwhelming firepower. They had won through ingenuity, adaptability, and collective effort. They had not sought glory, they had sought survival. And in doing so, they had transformed the war from a contest of strength into a battle of wits. As Part 5 closes, the twist of the war becomes clear. Humans are not the species the Council believed them to be. They are not predictable. They are not reckless. They are patient, observant, and unrelenting in pursuit of survival. And as the Council begins to question its own assumptions, humanity prepares for the next phase, not merely to endure, but to strike strategically, turning the tables in ways that will echo across the galaxy for generations to come. This is the essence of HFY. Humans are underestimated, ignored, even dismissed. Yet through courage, creativity, intelligence, and unity, they reshape the outcome, not with arrogance, but with calculated and relentless determination. And in that quiet, unassuming brilliance lies the beginning of humanity's true legend in the stars. Victory, even partial, came with a price. Humans had endured and adapted, but the galaxy is never kind to those who stand alone. Colonies were damaged, fleets scarred, and countless lives were lost. And yet, in the midst of destruction, humans did not despair. They did not falter. They mourned, repaired, and pressed forward. That is one of the subtle yet powerful truths of humanity. Courage is not measured by how little we bleed, but by how we rise after every loss. Captain Mira Chen watched her crew on the bridge of the Intrepid, a ship she had commanded for years. Half of her original crew were gone, lost in skirmishes to protect civilians or in traps set by the Council. She could feel the weight of each name, each memory, like a shadow across her thoughts. Yet she did not falter. She did not panic. In human terms, she did what was necessary. She ensured survivors reached safety, that supplies continued to flow, that morale remained steady. I always pause here when narrating to remind listeners. Heroism in humanity often looks like quiet endurance rather than dramatic triumph. It is the willingness to continue when everything seems lost. On distant colonies, engineers worked in near-total darkness, repairing ships with scavenged parts, improvising tools from materials at hand. Every repair, every adjustment, was a testament to human ingenuity. Even under fire, humans found ways to maintain operations. Council forces expected panic, expected desperation. Instead, they encountered calm, organized resistance. This, more than any technological edge, became humanity's defining weapon. The ability to persist, adapt, and innovate under pressure is one reason humans are underestimated, and one reason they endure. Admiral Jonah Reyes walked among crews, listening more than instructing. He reminded them that losses were tragic but not futile. Every failure taught a lesson, every sacrifice enabled the next strategic advantage. Humans, as a species, learn from hardship. That learning becomes a weapon far more powerful than any laser or missile. While alien fleets relied on hierarchy and rigid protocol, humans thrived in the chaos of loss, converting grief into action. And that is, I remind listeners, the essence of HFY. Endurance, intelligence, and ingenuity combined in the crucible of adversity. Even as casualties mounted, humans continued to fight with precision. During one critical engagement near the fracture fields, a small human convoy was ambushed while transporting vital supplies. Mira Chen's fleet responded, but not all could be saved. Several ships were lost, along with crews who had trained for years and never faltered in execution. Yet, by absorbing the attack, the remaining ships were able to escape and deliver the cargo. This balance, sacrifice to preserve the larger goal, is a recurring pattern in human history. And it's a lesson the Council would learn repeatedly. Humans understand that the cost of survival is never negligible, but it can be managed, mitigated, and turned into strategy. On Earth, the civilian population faced the psychological toll of war. Families separated across light years, anxieties compounded by news of losses, yet communities rallied. Schools adapted to teach emergency procedures, communities organized resource distribution, and scientists worked tirelessly to optimize food and medical supply chains. This integration of civilian and military effort blurred the line between combatant and supporter. Every human contributed, whether directly in battle or indirectly through coordination, repair, and innovation. And this unity became a quiet yet undeniable advantage over the Council. Humanity's greatest losses often came in unexpected moments. During a Council raid on a mining colony, dozens of civilians and engineers sacrificed themselves to prevent the capture of critical data and technology. They fought not for fame, not for glory, but for the survival of millions yet to be born. Mira Chen observed these losses with solemn pride, understanding that human courage often manifests not in visible heroics, but in silent, selfless acts. These acts of sacrifice would later become part of the cultural memory of humanity, a testament to their resilience and moral strength. The Council, observing from orbit and across light years, began to understand something unsettling. Humans did not break under loss. Instead, they adapted. When one supply route was destroyed, they created another. When one colony fell, refugees were absorbed into neighboring systems. Every setback became data, every tragedy became strategy. And this is a lesson worth emphasizing. In human society, endurance is often a greater weapon than raw strength. Humans survive where others falter because they do not allow losses to halt progress. They transform them into learning opportunities. Even leadership was not immune to the cost. Admiral Reyes lost trusted advisors and friends in repeated engagements. Ambassador Elena Mero faced the constant weight of negotiation under threat, knowing that every misstep could cost thousands of lives. Captain Mira Chen carried the memory of each fallen crew member like a shadow she could not shake. And yet, they continued to act decisively. This is the subtle brilliance of humanity. Courage is not the absence of grief but the mastery of it. Humans persist not because they are unfeeling, but because they understand that every life lost amplifies the responsibility to protect the living. Despite the mounting cost, humanity maintained a strategic advantage. Operation Anchor continued to immobilize portions of the Council fleet, exploiting weaknesses that no direct engagement could achieve. Humans had learned the value of patience, of planning, of precise action under uncertainty. They were not the species with the biggest guns, nor the fastest ships, nor the most technologically advanced fleet. But they were the species that endured, adapted, and innovated at every opportunity. That adaptability, combined with courage and unity, became the true measure of their power. In one of the most poignant moments of this period, a convoy transporting critical supplies to the outer colonies encountered a Council blockade. Several ships were lost, but human ingenuity turned the disaster into an advantage. Automated drones released false signatures, masking the true location of the surviving vessels. Engineers rerouted energy systems in real time to maximize efficiency under fire. And the remaining convoy, despite heavy losses, delivered its cargo safely. These acts, simultaneous sacrifice, adaptation, and ingenuity, illustrate the essence of humanity, calculated courage in the face of overwhelming odds. As Part 6 draws to a close, the human cost of war becomes clear. Lives have been lost, colonies damaged, fleets diminished. Yet, the spirit of humanity remains unbroken. Every setback has been a lesson, every loss a step toward strategic advantage, and every sacrifice a demonstration. Yet humanity's true victory was never measured solely by fleets destroyed or colonies defended. It was measured in endurance, creativity, and moral responsibility. Humans did not seek revenge or dominance. They sought survival, the protection of their people, and the careful, deliberate dismantling of threats in a way that minimized unnecessary loss. This approach, I often remind listeners, is what distinguishes HFY from mere military triumph. It is courage combined with intelligence, patience coupled with action, and unity executed across generations, systems, and disciplines. As the war drew toward its conclusion, the Council's forces, once supremely confident, began to withdraw, acknowledging that human resilience and adaptability had exceeded all expectations. Ambassador Elena Mero negotiated terms of withdrawal that preserved human sovereignty and expanded alliances with neutral civilizations. Humans did not celebrate this as conquest. Instead, they reflected, repaired, and prepared for the next challenges. For humanity, the lesson was clear. Survival is a product of preparation, courage, intelligence, and collaboration, not arrogance or brute force. Captain Mira Chen, standing on the bridge of her flagship, observed the aftermath of the final engagements. The fleets were battered but intact. Crews were exhausted but alive. Colonies had suffered but survived. And somewhere in the quiet moments, Mira realized the full weight of what had been accomplished. Humanity had been underestimated, threatened with annihilation, and yet they had endured. They had adapted. They had learned. And in doing so, they had demonstrated a principle older than any war. True strength lies not in dominance, but in resilience, ingenuity, and unity. Admiral Reyes convened a final council of commanders and civilian leaders. They spoke not of glory but of lessons learned. Every loss, every victory, every improvisation during the war was carefully analyzed to ensure humanity would be stronger in the future. Humans did not merely survive. They evolved strategically, morally, and intellectually through the crucible of conflict. And that, more than any ship or weapon, was the enduring triumph of humanity in the galaxy. Perhaps the most profound moment came in a quiet conversation between Elena Marrow and Captain Chin aboard a neutral station. "We've done more than survive," Elena said. "We've shown the galaxy what humans truly are." Mira nodded, looking out at the stars. "They never understood us. They assumed fear or emotion would guide us. But we guided ourselves with intelligence, preparation, and courage. That is something they cannot predict or control." This exchange captures the essence of HFY. Humans are strongest when underestimated, most dangerous when they are thought predictable, and most remarkable when courage, ingenuity, and unity intersect. By the end of the war, humans had redefined their place in the galaxy. They were no longer dismissed as chaotic, emotional, or primitive. They were respected, feared, and admired, not because they had the largest ships, the deadliest weapons, or the most advanced technology, but because they embodied resilience, creativity, teamwork, and moral strength. Every decision, every sacrifice, every quiet act of ingenuity had contributed to a victory that the galaxy could neither ignore nor underestimate. And so, as the story concludes, the lesson of humanity is clear. Strength is not measured by size, firepower, or raw force. True strength comes from preparation, intelligence, endurance, courage, and unity. Humans endure because they adapt, learn, and work together. Humans survive because they act not from arrogance, but from responsibility. And humans triumph not because they dominate but because they combine morality, creativity, and strategy in ways the galaxy cannot predict. As I close this narration, it is worth reflecting. The war with the Council was not merely a story of survival. It was a story of what humanity is at its best. It is the story of ingenuity under pressure, courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and unity that spans fleets, colonies, and generations. It is the story of humans quietly proving, time and again, that being underestimated is often the first step toward greatness. And that, dear listener, is the essence of HFY. In the stars, humans had endured. In the galaxy, humans had proven their worth. And in the hearts and minds of those who witnessed it, humanity had become a force defined not by arrogance or domination, but by intelligence, courage, endurance, and unity. The Council, and indeed all who had doubted them, would never forget it. And humanity, ever humble yet ever vigilant, continued to prepare, to innovate, and to thrive, because that is what humans do. They endure. They adapt. They prevail. Of courage and resilience. Humans endure because they combine intelligence, preparation, and ingenuity with empathy and moral responsibility. They fight not for glory but for survival, for family, for home. And this, I remind listeners, is the essence of HFY. Humanity's greatest strength is not its technology, its firepower, or even its numbers. It is the combination of endurance, ingenuity, courage, and unity. Humans adapt. Humans learn. Humans survive, and in surviving they redefine what it means to be strong. The Council, for all its experience and pride, had underestimated this from the beginning. And that miscalculation, I assure you, would shape the final stages of the war in ways they could never predict. By the end of this phase, humans had proven something remarkable. Victory is not the absence of loss, but the ability to continue in spite of it. They had endured, they had adapted, and they had learned. And though the cost had been immense, it had forged a species more capable, more united, and more resilient than any the galaxy had yet encountered. Humanity had survived the crucible of attrition, and now they were ready for the moment when survival would transform into triumph. After years of conflict, the war had reached a turning point. Humans had endured ambushes, blockades, and direct assaults from the Council's fleets, yet they had not only survived, they had adapted, learned, and begun to turn the tide. The galaxy, which had once dismissed humanity as unpredictable, emotional, or primitive, now watched in disbelief. It is always worth pausing when narrating this part. The galaxy expected humans to panic, to crumble, to surrender. Instead, humans had demonstrated something that no alien species had anticipated: resilience born of ingenuity, courage tempered with calculation, and unity that bound both civilians and soldiers into a single force. Captain Mira Chin oversaw the deployment of a critical mission designed to cripple a portion of the Council fleet that had been immobilized for months. These were not spectacularly massive ships, nor were the maneuvers loud or flashy. They were precise, coordinated, and carefully executed, exactly the way humans approached every challenge. Using stealth drones, adaptive shields, and rapid-fire communication between ships, humans struck at critical systems: engine cores, sensor arrays, and supply nodes. In hours, the immobilized fleet was neutralized. The Council did not expect victory to come quietly. And that is one of humanity's most subtle advantages: strength without arrogance, intelligence without showmanship. Admiral Jonah Reyes reflected on the years of preparation that had led to this moment. Humans had been underestimated from the beginning. They had been assumed weak because their fleets were smaller. They had been assumed predictable because they acted with reason rather than panic. And in the shadows of those assumptions, humans had built networks of information, fleets of adaptable ships, and strategies that exploited every flaw in the Council's approach. Humanity's advantage had never been firepower. It had always been thought, coordination, and courage under pressure. Meanwhile, Ambassador Elena Mero managed negotiations and diplomacy in parallel. Neutral species, once hesitant, now approached human leaders for counsel and alliance. Humans had demonstrated a quiet power, the ability to endure, to act intelligently, and to unify their people in defense of shared principles. The Council, with all its history and technology, had underestimated the human mind, the human spirit, and the human capacity for teamwork. Elena's calm, reasoned presence in negotiations mirrored what the fleets had already shown in space. Humans do not bluff. Humans calculate. Humans act. And in the end, calculation outmaneuvers impulse every time. The psychological impact on the Council was profound. Generals and admirals who had assumed humans would panic or overreact now found themselves facing a species that anticipated mistakes, learned from attacks, and exploited weaknesses in ways no other civilization had achieved. Communications faltered. Confidence eroded. And in space, hesitation can be fatal. The galaxy had long associated human emotion with unpredictability, but the truth was far more unsettling. Human emotion was paired with reason, reflection, and ingenuity, creating a force that was as adaptive as it was unpredictable. Human civilians continued to play a pivotal role. Scientists developed new energy storage systems to maintain fleet efficiency. Engineers refined weapons in real time, adapting them to exploit vulnerabilities in alien technology. Colonies evacuated intelligently, hiding resources and creating decoys that confused enemy scouts. Families endured separation, maintaining morale and support networks even as the war raged across star systems. The Council had assumed only fleets mattered. Humans demonstrated that a species fighting as a unified whole, military, civilians, and leaders together, could achieve outcomes no single fleet could accomplish alone. During one decisive engagement in the Perseus Expanse, humans executed a maneuver that would later become legendary. Using predictive modeling, the fleet anticipated the Council's attempt to reinforce a stranded detachment. Human ships appeared in multiple locations simultaneously, feeding false sensor data while the main strike force targeted critical command vessels. In less than a standard battle cycle, the Council's detachment was neutralized without civilian casualties. It was a textbook demonstration of strategy over strength, intelligence over intimidation. And as I pause here for narration, it is worth emphasizing, humans had mastered the art of war not through overwhelming power, but through observation, patience, and ingenuity.